Chapter 2, October 1st, 2024, Operation Unified Peace. It was supposed to be a holiday. On October 1st, 2024, the People's Republic of China celebrated its National Day, commemorating the founding of the modern Chinese state. But beneath the fireworks and flag waving in Beijing, a far more chilling ceremony was unfolding across military bases in Fujian, Zhejiang, and the East China Sea. Codenamed Operation Unified Peace, the largest invasion force assembled since D-Day began moving into position. At precisely 4:13 local time, the first missile lifted off. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a statement of dominance. The opening barrage, outer islands silenced. The assault began with simultaneous saturation bombardments of Taiwan's strategic offshore islands, Kinmen, Matsu, and Penghu. These islands, long seen as symbolic red lines, were wiped clean within hours. CJ-10 and DF-11 ballistic missiles rained down on radar installations and artillery bunkers. Rocket barrages from Type 83 and PHL-191 launchers on the Chinese mainland flattened garrisons and command outposts. The island's defenders barely had time to send distress signals before communications went dark. Taiwanese news outlets, caught off guard, reported seismic activity before realizing what was really happening. Within the first 4 hours, the islands had fallen. The death of the 7th Fleet. But the true shock came just after sunrise. Stationed in the Taiwan Strait, the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet, meant to be a visible deterrent, became the target of one of the most sophisticated missile ambushes in modern warfare. From the eastern coast of China and several disguised barge platforms, the PLA unleashed hypersonic DF-17 glide vehicles capable of evasive terminal phase maneuvers. Sea-skimming cruise missiles launched in synchronized saturation waves, decoy drones and jamming pods that confused radar arrays, low-orbit jammers that collapsed the Aegis fire control network at the height of engagement. Despite its advanced SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors, phalanx CIWs, and electronic warfare suites, the 7th Fleet was overwhelmed. Aegis systems went blind. Missile tracking spiraled out of sync. Destroyers were hit mid-broadside, one after another. The USS Princeton exploded from a magazine detonation. The USS Shiloh was broken in half by dual DF-21D impacts. Even the fleet flagship USS Ronald Reagan was crippled and began listing within 20 minutes. Over 15,000 American personnel were lost, not over months, not in campaign attrition, but in a single coordinated strike. Only one vessel, the stealth attack submarine USS Asheville, escaped the kill box and transmitted the emergency after-action report. By the time it reached Yokosuka Naval Base, the world had changed. The broadcast heard around the world. At 7:15 a.m. Beijing time, state-run CGTN interrupted regular programming to deliver a special address. A high-ranking PLA general, flanked by the national flag and speaking in flawless clipped Mandarin, stepped to the podium. Taiwan is and always has been a sacred and inseparable part of China. The time of foreign manipulation is over. We now bring peace through unity. The broadcast concluded with footage of PLA boots marching through the ruins of Kinmen and drone formations tracing a glowing O symbol across the sky over the Taiwan Strait. But while the world was watching, Taiwan was already being silenced. Minutes before the speech, Taiwan lost nearly 95% of its internet connectivity. It wasn't a glitch, it was war. Simultaneously, PLA divers and unmanned submersibles detonated depth charges and plasma cutters against Taiwan's 8 undersea internet cables, which connect it to the global web through Japan, Hong Kong, China, the Philippines, Guam, Singapore, Malaysia. All were targeted. 4 were completely severed, 3 were crippled, and 1, linking to Guam, was rerouted through a Chinese-controlled node. This wasn't just cyber warfare, it was digital decapitation. Military satellite comms began defaulting to emergency protocols. Banking systems froze. Civilian communications fell back to radio towers and SMS fallback servers. Social media went black across the island. Commanders were forced to issue orders by handwritten courier, a method no longer tested since the Cold War. The outside world was left watching China's triumphant broadcast, while Taiwan was left unable to scream. Panic and chaos in Taiwan. When the bombs began falling on Kinmen and Matsu, Taiwan braced for a fight. But when the internet vanished, it braced for something worse. In the early morning hours of October 1st, as families stared at their phones in disbelief, The island's digital connection to the world collapsed in stages. Online banking, social media, and government communications went dead in under 15 minutes. Most assumed it was a cyber attack, but it wasn't. The truth came from a cryptic emergency message issued by the Ministry of Digital Affairs. Taiwan's international communications infrastructure has been physically compromised. Do not attempt to access foreign hosted services. Stand by for radio updates. China had physically severed the island's undersea internet cables. By dawn, 95% of Taiwan's external internet capacity had gone dark. Hospitals couldn't access cloud-based databases. GPS-linked traffic systems froze. Military units reverted to analog maps and handwritten courier dispatches. Digital air raid sirens failed in some cities, leaving whole districts unaware of inbound missiles. People swarmed banks and ATMs only to find frozen accounts. Gas stations refused cards and reverted to cash, triggering street-level brawls over fuel. Emergency response services, now relying on shortwave radio, were overwhelmed. The feeling on the streets of Taipei, Taichung, and Hualien was more than fear. It was abandonment. The Air Force's last launch Taiwan's fighter pilots had trained for every nightmare, except this one. Inside hardened mountain air bases, built to survive nuclear strikes, dozens of ROC fighter jets sat prepped for rapid launch. But as the PLA's missiles screamed toward the coast, they hit more than just the airfields. They targeted the human nervous system of modern warfare. Digital coordination. The air traffic control networks, early warning systems, and launch permission software were suddenly unusable. Pilots were handed paper orders, old-school launch charts, and verbal coordinates over analog radio. It was heroic and suicidal. The first wave of F-16s barely cleared the hangars before precision-guided CJ-10s smashed into the runway behind them. Mirage 2005 scrambled into the sky with no radar sync, relying only on onboard targeting and instinct. One IDF pilot fired flares by hand after his countermeasure system failed to boot mid-takeoff. Only a handful got airborne, and they were alone. Waiting for them in the sky were stealth J-20s, J-7 bombers, and drone swarms guided by satellite uplinks. The PLA had full digital clarity. The ROCAF had static. Those few fighters that launched engaged in one-sided dogfights, their kills rare and short-lived. None returned. The digital silence. What many thought was a DDoS attack revealed itself to be something far more permanent. With the undersea cables cut, Taiwan's civilian internet collapsed. But so did almost every military subsystem that relied on cloud-linked infrastructure. Command and control platforms, reliant on satellite timing and external syncing, began desensing by the hour. Battlefield awareness software used by forward observers went blind. Even friend or foe identification gear began to malfunction, forcing some ROC units to visually confirm targets, a dangerous and primitive throwback. False news and deepfakes circulated on shortwave frequencies. A message claiming the Taiwanese president had surrendered reached several battalions. Another said the U.S. had already withdrawn. Both were false. But without internet, no one could verify anything. In the chaos, ROC units began making decisions on instinct, some heroic, others tragic. A handful accidentally fired on retreating civilian convoys, believing them to be disguised PLA columns. By the end of the day, Taiwan's military wasn't just losing ground, it was fighting blind. Washington's shock and dilemma. The undersea cable attack stunned not just Taipei, but also Washington, Tokyo, Canberra, and London. It was the first time in history a major cyberkinetic strike had physically disconnected a developed country from the world. And the speed at which China followed that act with open warfare left U.S. defense planners reeling. In the White House Situation Room, real-time drone footage of burning hangars, shattered airfields, and empty skies over Taiwan played silently on large screens. Then came the data. The 7th Fleet is gone. We have 16 vessels confirmed destroyed, 5 missing, and 1 escapee, the Asheville. Over 15,000 dead in under 2 hours. President Trump, seated with clasped hands, nodded once and asked the only question that mattered. What's the retaliation window? The answer was grim. We've already launched. Marines are mobilizing. Rangers are wheels up in under 3 hours. This is no longer containment. It's response. The operation was named immediately Dawn Retaliation. And by that night, the Indo-Pacific was on fire.